we often hear of if you're let go from a job or maybe you're at your line of work, you see someone escorted out of the building, you kind of know what's going on there. Chad, you and I have known coaches who this has happened to. But apparently the Council on American Islamic Relations, I'm taking that as CAIR, C-A-I-R, released a press release following the NBC Sports report that Robert Saleh was escorted out of the Jets facility by their head of security, physically, quote-unquote, escorted out of the building, and pointed to a possibility that it had something to do with him being a Muslim American and having that background. Wearing a patch on his sleeve that they said was a pin in their release, which it was not. And get a great write-up by Armando Salguero at OutKick.com on this. Jumping to conclusions, while also saying that they were hesitant for anyone to jump to conclusions on this story as to why he was fired by the New York Jets. And in the same tone, in the same press release, jumping to conclusions on the fact that the Jets may or may not have done something that was unusual hostility towards Robert Saleh. Not even taking the time to figure out that the head of security for the New York Jets is one of his best friends. Makes no sense. And this is one of those, fishing for a reason to be insulted, fishing for a reason to be at the head of the line to claim discrimination. And it falls flat on its face yesterday.
I have to commend, is it CAIR or is it like Cairo, the start of it?
Maybe it's CAIR.
CAIR.
C-A-I-R.
CAIR.
Council on American Islamic Relations.
C-A-I-R. I will commend them for even including something as guarded and reasonable as, although no one should jump to conclusions as to why he was fired. That's not something you normally read. When PETA goes after someone, they don't start with, we shouldn't jump to conclusions about that billionaire who just killed a hippo on an African safari.
Okay.
They don't start with that. No one should jump to conclusions about the person with the protected species that they're holding up as big game.
We don't know if that's real fur.
Yeah, when they're throwing blood on someone, at the Met Gala, they're not saying, we don't want to jump to conclusions about whether or not this fur is real or not. So at least this group, CAIR, they cared enough to say,
there you go.
Let's not jump to conclusions about this. This warms my heart.
But it's also just an attempt to be like, hey, we were here first. We were here first. If anyone else wants to jump on board.
Well, the part that's annoying, very irritating. First off, it is a little bit strange if he's not allowed to speak to anyone and is just fired. First off, it's strange to be fired on the Tuesday, getting ready for another game week, and then to be escorted out. And if he wanted to talk to the team, to not be allowed to do it. I can see why that would not be the case, and they want to move on and all that. But as Armando says, talking with people in the Jets organization, it's the head of team security that's one of his best friends. He wasn't being drug out of there or anything. He's walking with him to his vehicle after he gets fired. I don't like the part of this statement that says, especially given that Saleh wore a Lebanese flag pin at a game just days ago, and that owner Woody Johnson is a former Trump administration official who has been accused of making racially charged remarks. Donald Trump has talked about being a fan of Robert Saleh and called him at one point after they come back and beat the Cleveland Browns. And Robert Saleh talked about how awesome it was to get a call from any president, past or present, and that he would always take that call. So
they leave out
that's
the part
I don't like.
That Woody Johnson hired him.
Right.
If he's against anything that has to do with this accusation, that he hired the guy. So again, it has nothing. It has everything to do with football and making sure Aaron Rodgers is happy, right? I mean, that's all this comes down to.
Yeah, if he bought the team,
they play on Monday night.
Yeah, if he took over for the team, Woody Johnson did on the Tuesday leading into this game, and his first act of business was to fire Robert Saleh,
right?
Having never met him, then maybe I'd look into the statement that CAIR said and that. But you're right, Hutton. He's been the owner for a while, and he also hired Robert Saleh.
And he's wearing team-issued gear.
Yeah.
And it's a patch on the sleeve of team-issued
Was this a thing?
Gear.
This is the first I heard of the patch that he was wearing.
Well, they wear this for their international football games.
Yeah, because Bill Belichick wears like the Croatian flag on his. It was the first time I noticed it.
So yeah,
Was when he would wear it with
they're
his
coming
Patriots
back from
gear.
London. He's let go on Tuesday, and they play on Monday night, so they have the extra day going into a game against the Buffalo Bills. Interim head coach is Jeff Ulbrich now, as you touched on yesterday, Chad. And Nathaniel Hackett was going to be fired by Robert Saleh. Apparently, the report's going now that it would have been Todd Downing to replace the offensive coordinator. And
well, he was
Hackett.
he was demoted. This is the craziest part of the timing. Robert Saleh had to have the uncomfortable meeting where they met, and he removed on in-game play calling duties from Nathaniel Hackett and gave it to Todd Downing. And then right after that, he's called into a meeting where he was fired. So now all of that's negated, I guess. I guess Coach Ulbrich is not going to go with Todd Downing or replacing Nathaniel Hackett.
The only thing that Ulbrich has said is that they intend to take a hard look, quote unquote, at everything on offense. Ulbrich is, by the way, considered one of the up and coming head coaching candidates. I mean, the Jets' defense is not to blame here. He's the defensive coordinator. They replace a defensive-minded head coach with a defensive-minded interim head coach, and Woody Johnson's trying to say that it was all on him and his decision. But there's no doubt there's been some unrest behind the scenes between veteran quarterback and head coach Robert Saleh. And didn't we see this coming? This was written on the wall whenever they kicked off the season, and they started slow. Even when they came to Nashville, there was a discussion, an undertone of Saleh better start winning because they've got a stretch here of winnable games with a talented team, and there's a win now mentality with a quarterback that's in it to win it, and everything's built around him. Future is now.
A quarterback that turns 41 in December. And talk about the start of that season. They go to San Francisco in a game that everybody chalked up as, well, it's opening in San Francisco. They're going to lose. They did. 49ers are now 2-3. Same as the New York Jets, sitting there at 2-3 also. So that game may end up looking different also, depending on whether or not the 49ers get it together. My favorite part of the Armando piece on this statement from this group on Robert Saleh was where he puts Saleh's parents immigrated legally, and then in all caps, legally. From the Middle East to the United States before Saleh was born. Well done, Armando.
From Ulbrich, we're going to take a deep dive in what they're wanting to change in the next 36 hours to look at every possibility. I do not see changes in necessarily titles and positions. As far as responsibilities and the process itself, we're going to take a hard look at that. That being who's calling plays, the system, foundation of the offense. And I would say in the next 36 hours, you talk to your offensive coordinator, Aaron Rodgers, about what you want to do moving forward. Aaron Rodgers adamant that he had nothing to do with this, saying that he and Saleh have a great relationship. And how dare anyone assume that Rodgers spoke with Woody Johnson, even though they did on Monday, where the insinuation was that Rodgers wanted Saleh out.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday was a day that reminds you of the simple fact that all of us who've played know all too well, and that's that it's a tough business. It's a beautiful profession. It's incredible. It's done so much for our lives, but it's also a really tough business. I love Coach Saleh. We have a very solid relationship. We have since, I met him in 2021. And had a nice conversation when they came and visited us for joint practices. He was a big reason why I came to the Jets. I felt like the team, was a solid team. Had a relationship with Coach Hackett, obviously, and I really liked Coach Saleh. Everything that Matt LaFleur said about him, the few interactions I've had, the times that we went against him, I just had a lot of respect for him. And so, it was just a reminder yesterday how tough the business is. I think what people can forget in this is not only is Robert a fantastic human being and a damn good football coach, he's also a family man. He's got 7 kids. He's got an incredible wife. And the business of football can be hard, not just on those of us who are playing and coaching and doing personnel things and ownership, obviously, but it's tough on the families. And I've got to know Robert's family over the last couple of years, and especially one of his kids, Adam. Adam's my little throwing buddy from training camp. Love Adam. He's an incredible kid. And so I'm thinking there's obviously a lot of emotions, but you think about the family and the kids as much as the people you love, your own family, who is the coaching staff and the players, and what they're all going through. So, anybody who's kind of championing this decision, I would just appeal to the humanity of the situation and remind you there's other people involved. And Adam has to go to school today, possibly, or this week. And hopefully there's no, kids with poor parents who are making snide side comments to him. It's just a reminder there's a lot of things involved in this. As far as any of the ridiculous allegations out there, I'm not going to spend more than one sentence in response to it, and that is that I resent any of those accusations because they're patently false. And it's interesting the amount of power that people think that I have, which I don't. But I love Robert, and it was one of those days yesterday.
There's Aaron Rodgers saying that he doesn't have the power that we all think he does, Chad, even though he misses mandatory minicamp to go to Egypt. He has Nathaniel Hackett there as his offensive coordinator. He has Alan Lazard there at wide receiver. Likely going to have Devontae Adams there at wide receiver, but doesn't have any power over what's going on.
Yeah, and look, I feel bad for Adam, Robert Saleh's kid that throws with Aaron Rodgers. What a cool gig that was to get to throw to Aaron Rodgers during practice and all that. And he makes great points about the family being a part of this, right? Robert Saleh is going to end up being fine. They're going to probably have to move. He's going to get another job somewhere else as an assistant. He'll continue to make a lot of money to coach football, but you obviously don't want any of the kids to be affected or people to say things in school or any of that. And anyone that's a human can understand the humanity side of that. And Aaron Rodgers did a good job of laying that part of it out to everyone, which is understandable. It would have been a story if Aaron Rodgers was not informed in any way. That's what I keep thinking about. Like, if immediately Robert Saleh was fired and then Mike Florio or Tom Pelissero or someone else says, being told by those close to Aaron Rodgers that he had no idea this was coming, or that he's as blindsided as anyone, or no one in ownership talked to him about it, that too would have been a story. So I think Aaron understands deep down why this is a story either way, and how everyone would immediately look to the star quarterback that the Jets paid a ton of money to a 40-year-old to be there that does have a lot of power, and think, gee, I wonder if Aaron knew anything about it before he was fired. That's all that they're saying. I don't know that anybody's saying Aaron Rodgers went to Woody Johnson and said, fire this man immediately. I wasn't thinking that, but Hutton, don't you think it's reasonable to expect that Woody Johnson would have maybe told Aaron Rodgers beforehand this is what he's thinking?
Yeah, I mean,
it's also possible he didn't.
Woody Johnson said that they met on Monday, but it wasn't about the coaching change, a possibility of it. And also, right here on Pat McAfee's show that we just played, he's all but confirming that he's all for it, because Aaron Rodgers, he bristles at the idea of how dare you say anything that my cadence is somehow forcing 5 false starts in a game, or offensive line issues. 5 of the 8 offensive penalties in a game, 10 days ago, had anything to do with me. He's saying that post-game presser. How about saying that everyone else needs to step up?
Yeah, holding players accountable is one way to stop it.
Yeah.
Was his response.
Here it's, Saul and I are friends. Hope it's a family that we need to keep in perspective.
You're going to miss Adam.
Yeah, but you see what I'm saying. He's not against it based on the way he answers this question. But he's just fine being against something and letting everyone know.
Well, there's also one thing that we know without a doubt, knowing Aaron Rodgers and everything he said and what he's about, that he would have been against. That is his ping pong buddy, Nathaniel Hackett, having his play calling duty stripped.
Which still may happen, but we'll see.
Aaron Rodgers loves that guy.
Oh, yeah.
But point being,
you're right. You're right.
Robert Saleh,
he's there because of it.
I mean, these are a bunch of strikes for Aaron Rodgers, right?
It's not Saleh's guy.
Your cadence is an issue, and then Aaron Rodgers says you not holding players accountable is an issue with penalties, and then Robert Saleh basically caves the next time he's asked about it. and kind of gives in to Aaron Rodgers on that point, and then he's going to strip play calling duties from his guy, his ping pong pal in Nathaniel Hackett, he would be pissed off about that. And you're right, he still may be pissed off because Jeff Ulbrich may come in and say, yeah, this guy sucks.
Yeah, but they're not going to change titles. It's just that's what Ulbrich is also. Again, like it's also.
Just let Aaron Rodgers call the plays like Johnny Unitas. I mean, at this point, like if that's going to be the issue, then just let the quarterback call every play.
Yeah, I mean.
It's offensively, Aaron, it is all on you, my friend. As long as your Achilles is in place and you're playing the game, you do whatever the hell you want out there. We'll just follow your lead.
If
I was Jeff Ulbrich, I'd say, hey, we're going to go down together, baby. I'm either going to get this job permanently because my defense is going to kick ass and you're going to be great on offense. And if we're going to do that, if you think you need total control of the offense, have at it because your ping pong buddy sucks.
The other thing, Chad, is.
And has consistently sucked.
A change would have been warranted, and I think it's easily defended. If Saleh ends up making that move. Because the offense right now has scored as many points as they did at this time last year with Zach Wilson at quarterback. Like they're right there at the same marker offensively. With that in mind, it's not been good. And this move also puts everything on Rodgers now. It already was. But now you don't have the scapegoat of Saleh's just not a head coach. He's a coordinator that's in the head coaching role. And that can also be true. But while the defense is fantastic, the offense, led by the veteran QB that it was all about Super Bowl or bust last year, then he gets hurt. Now he's back. They've added to the arsenal. My guess is they're going to add more to the arsenal. And they've got to go for it. I also don't necessarily hate the move because it does give a boost. We have seen this in the past. You make a coaching change, and there is a bolt of energy that goes through a locker room that kind of revives whatever the goal was. And what we also don't know is what was going on behind the scenes between Rodgers and Saleh. There's clearly something that was just off, right? Like something that was not on the same wavelength. And there's no way that Saleh could say he was blindsided by this. Team's not let. Woody Johnson, for the first time, makes an in-season coaching change. Maybe that's what blindsided him. But at 2-3, this doesn't look like an AFC team that's going to compete for a championship. And you don't know if Rodgers is back next year. You're not built for the long-term future or even 2 years from now. You're built for right now. And if you're going to trade for Devontae Adams, what good is it going to do if you're just going to continue the same thing moving forward?
Well, I think Woody Johnson kind of figuring everything out said, let's take the substitute teacher boost of energy approach. You know, when you get the substitute teacher in and it's fun for a day or two or a week that your normal teacher's out and everybody's more energetic and enthused, you do get a boost sometimes for a team when that happens with an interim. So he's trying to bank on that possibly happening while also just admitting that Robert Saleh, who, by the way, in a terrible franchise, and one of the more cursed ones in the NFL, you put them and the Browns right up there. Robert Saleh, for coaching a minimum of 40 games, is the worst Jets coach in history, based on record. Worse than Bruce Coslet. Worse than Todd Bowles as the Jets coach. So not good from a win-loss standpoint. And we can point to a number of different areas as to why that was. But when you factor all that in, no, it's not overly shocking. It is going to be a thrill a minute now to see what the Jets become and what Aaron Rodgers and this offense, if they can muster anything. Now that this has happened, and what if this does give them energy and give them some wins? Because if they beat the Bills, they're tied for first in the division. So, I mean, one gigantic win it would be. But if they come back after firing Robert Saleh, win this one game, they're right there tied for the division with everything out in front of them and maybe some new life. But I'm just not seeing it right now with this offense.
No, they're 25th right now in the offensive.
Aaron Rodgers is 28th in yards per attempt so far. So Aaron Rodgers reminds me of Tom Brady in 2019 in his last year with the Patriots. He seems to be seeing ghosts. Even when he's not getting pressured, he's getting pressured. And he's trying to get rid of the ball quicker and quicker.
They also don't have Breece. Where's Breece Hall in all this? So you mentioned sometimes you get the boost of energy with the interim head coach. That energy has to come from Aaron Rodgers. Where's the energy and the expectation and the cohesive locker room that was there a year ago going into the season? That entire offseason, that first offseason with Rodgers was an about face for what we saw or what we were hearing about in Green Bay.
Yeah.
And you're not hearing that same tone. You know, not everyone's marching to the same cadence right now. And now it's been on Rodgers. It remains on Rodgers, those expectations. And if he wants to claim, I had nothing to do with it, he can stand at the podium and answer questions from a media that was asking him about Saleh prior to this move happening. And he could stand there and say, yeah, I mean, I want him to stay. Players have done that before. Players were doing that for interim coaches that were trying to get the full-time job.
Yeah.
We've seen that firsthand here with Mike Mularkey before they went to Vrabel.
And he can answer the question, did you want him to stay? Are you upset that he's gone?
You can answer that, yeah. Because everyone knows he wants Davante Adams, even though he's saying, I can't say anything because there's things like tampering.
Well, and if you look
but we all know that he wants Davante Adams.
Just watch the game. First off, Braylon Allen is their best running back right now. I feel like every time I'm watching, the rookie from Wisconsin.
Scored 2 touchdowns week 1.
And who does Aaron Rodgers have a trust factor with? It's Alan Lazard, who he played with before. I don't see a lot of trust on either side with Aaron Rodgers and other teammates right now.
Well, it's got to be Garrett Wilson.
You got to get some trust going with Garrett Wilson.
Yes.
If the offense is going to go. But that's my point. I feel like in every third down big situation, I think that he's automatically looking Alan Lazard's way because they have that history in Green Bay together. And he feels like he knows what he's going to get from him, whether that's something great or not. And he's looking his way for that reason.
And then you also have Woody Johnson, who's asked about Hassan Reddick. You know, there's the other storyline there that was an offseason storyline. They trade for him. He comes in for the initial presser, and then he hasn't been seen since April. Refuses to report without the long-term deal. He's not going to show up. He wants the long-term deal before, or the negotiation to happen before he reports. The Jets want him to report. This has long been their stance. Report, and then we can talk about that. Report, play, and then we can talk about it. You have Woody Johnson now saying, no, we're going to roll out the red carpet. We hope he shows up now. Hey, you're 90 minutes away. Drive here and return to the New York Jets to Hassan Reddick. Yeah, sure.
We'll get you an escort in.
Yeah, red carpet.
We'll get you
red carpet style. I'm sure that's going to happen.
The opposite.
We'll escort you. We'll escort you in while we escort Robert Saleh out.
It's logistics, right? It's an ingress-egress plan. He had the egress plan with Robert Saleh. He has the ingress plan with Hassan Reddick. We want to bring him in, Saleh out. They have the security personnel to accommodate both, whether you're leaving or entering the facility. So that's all he wants. He just wants Reddick to be in.
Chad, Nick Saban was not escorted out. Red carpet. Anytime he speaks, it's the red carpet effect of, flashing lights. Anything he can say no wrong. Deep down, though, what he hasn't said is something that you've been pondering. That he got out at the right time, and he had been thinking about why for some time.
Yeah, Nick Saban's, no one's accusing him of being dumb. Certainly a smart guy. So why did Nick Saban retire when he did? Right? Is it just his age, or what is it? Or could it be the fact that he saw the writing on the wall? So many people point to the writing on the wall just being NIL, transfer portal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could it possibly be, though, that NIL and transfer portal were leading Nick Saban to feel like he was not going to be able to assert his dominance anymore at Alabama, and that we've been missing everything with this, and what all of this really means is not a further separation of the haves and the have-nots, but maybe a shrinking of the gap between the haves and the have-nots? Is there not a greater example of this than what happened on West End Avenue Saturday night when Diego Pavia and Vanderbilt knocked off Alabama, beating a top-5 opponent for the first time in 61 tries as a university for Vanderbilt? Is it a coincidence this happened in the NIL era where Vanderbilt brings in 22 transfers in 1 year, and those transfers have completely remade their roster? Matt Rule, Nebraska head coach, has thoughts on just that.
It's great. Again, it goes back to what I said all training camp of looking at the schedule before the season and saying what games are easy and what games are hard is not true, and it's not the way of college football anymore. Everyone's got to get that in. Like how many teams lost to teams that you would have never thought Alabama would ever lose to Vandy? You never would have thought maybe USC would lose to Minnesota. The portal, transfers, and it's changed all of it. That's why there's no undefeated NFL teams, right? So, it used to be that a player would say, man, I got offered from, whomever, Ohio State. I'm going there, But now he might get offered, I might get offered from Blue Mountain State, let's just say. And that's the top school in the country. And they're offering, hey, we'll give you, X amount of money. And another school that's 2 pegs lower on the pecking order of recruiting will say, hey, we'll give you 3 times that. Because for this guy, he's their 15th best recruit. But for them, they're like, well, we can't get those guys. Let's get him. So now that kid's like, do I go there for $50,000 or do I go there for $250,000? So all of a sudden so why were the great teams of the 90s and 2000s, 2010s, why were they so dominant? They stacked up all the talent. And when guys got hurt, the next guy came in was also a Parade All-American. Now the Parade All-Americans are all spreading out a little bit more. So it's just different. So the days of, it's just different now. So I think Indiana's a tremendous example of that. It's a completely different roster this year than it was next year. You guys got stuck with me. Like I said, I didn't get to bring anybody with me. I love Bryant, but he can't play. They didn't let me bring McCaffrey. They didn't let me bring Brian Burns. So we came in here and we just been building with the guys that were here and trying to recruit. Just kind of a little more the old school way. But you know what? Like people that are moving now, it's just a different world. So we all have to just adjust to it.
And Matt Rule's a great example of this. Dylan Raiola committed for a while to Georgia, looked at Ohio State, 2 national powers. Georgia recently won 2 national championships. He goes to Nebraska in part because he's got a family tie there with his dad and his uncle, but also likely because Nebraska paid him a lot more money. I mean, in this analogy he's talking about, they're that 5th or 6th school down the list that says, we'll pay you $2 million instead of $700,000 or $500,000. That's how much you mean to us here, and you can start something great back at a place that has not had much success in recent history, 10, 15 years. So that game being played with every program now and the ability to play it, I think Nick Saban saw the writing on the wall with all that. He doesn't like it. I think he's legitimately against it, and he does want guardrails up like a lot of coaches do with all of it. So I'm not saying that he just got out because, his greatness was being threatened, but I think in part he also knew that his greatness at Alabama was going to be challenged with some of this. Was he still going to get great players? Yeah. Was Alabama going to pay? Yeah. They were going to pay. But when you have other schools around you that suddenly can go get guys that would be the backup edge rusher at Alabama, and now they can go to Arkansas or Vanderbilt or Kentucky, and they're a starter and they're making more money, it does eliminate your advantage of having better depth than everyone else and having great depth at every position group. And now suddenly a couple of injuries, a couple things happen with transfer guys coming in that aren't quite as good as you thought. And before you know it, you're losing to Vanderbilt or you're losing at Arkansas if you're Tennessee. The margin of error has shrunk. And Hutton, I think maybe the positive of this is that maybe the competitive nature of all of this grows and the parity grows in the SEC. And I think we're seeing a bit of that this year. Look, it's always hard to win on the road, too. Let's note that. I know Vanderbilt's not your typical road environment, but it's not like every year we're not talking about some crazy outcome in the SEC or Big Ten with just a team on the road having a hard time and losing.
Yeah, just not at Vandy.
Vandy was 0 for 60 against top 5 opponents. And I'll also say this about Vandy's win. Would have been a much bigger deal if Nick Saban was still coaching.
And they had not won.
All due respect
to
Kalen DeBoer, but if they beat Saban, it would have been exponentially bigger, don't you think?
Oh, sure. But here's the thing. I know you said on Monday, this doesn't happen if Saban's the coach. Here's why. Kalen DeBoer allowed this feeling, and he didn't know he was doing it, but he was a part of it. This idea that you show up and you just beat Vandy, which, that's what happens when you're Alabama. Vanderbilt had not won against Bama at home since Watson Brown was the quarterback. And Watson Brown is now a retired former college football coach of UAB and a head coach at Vandy. Think about that.
Yeah.
That it's been a long time. And Kalen DeBoer, in his press conference to kick off the next week following the win over Georgia, guess how many times he mentioned Vanderbilt in the entire presser? 0. Didn't mention Vandy at all. And they clearly didn't prepare for what the transfers that came in, including Diego Pavia, New Mexico State, how New Mexico State beat Auburn with that same type of style. They didn't prepare for anything defensively. And while, yes, I think you have to be more – I think there's an admission that, yes, you can't just show up and kick off the football and know you're going to win now with the landscape. There is also this you can't just show up as number one and assume you're number one. I think that also was detrimental to Alabama, being number one in the country.
Yeah.
After everything that went down. I think it was a mentality, because how else do you explain how those transfers, how those Vanderbilt recruits were winning off the line of scrimmage for 4 quarters against the Alabama Crimson Tide? Even if it's the backups that were leaving programs, they couldn't do it in practice to not be the backup, right? Like, that was what was so alarming in all of this. It just in that one glimpse after doing that against Georgia, that the mentality can just flip.
Yeah, I really do think it's going to make, optimistically, it's going to make college football way more exciting as we move forward.
It's going to be great. It's great now.
You know, I look at Vanderbilt's offensive line. Let's talk about that offensive line that physically dominated Bama up front. They did. They won the game in the trenches.
Yep.
Which is shocking to think about a Vanderbilt team beating Alabama in the trenches the way they did. They got a starting left tackle from Liberty that came in as a veteran guy. I think they got another offensive lineman from UTEP, who's a 4 or 5 year starter there that's coming into the end of his career. Point being, so many of these rosters now, we're just not going to know.
Right.
Right? I mean, we thought we knew about Florida State, or the voters did. They were 9th in the nation in the AP preseason. We didn't know anything about Florida State. They're not good at all.
And Vanderbilt didn't know
because
themselves.
They brought in the wrong guys.
That's what Barton told us. Yeah.
Barton Simmons said, we felt like we knew that we were going to be improved, but we didn't know how improved.
Because they went into the dead period right after.
Yeah, I mean, and he told the story. Vandy lost all of their quarterbacks, all of their receivers.
Yeah.
So when they're recruiting Nate Johnson from Utah or Diego Pavia from New Mexico State, they had no quarterbacks or receivers on campus to sell.
And trying to.
So you're starting from scratch.
Get a coach to replace.
But we didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about it a little bit this offseason. I said it's an interesting test case for Vandy that they essentially took. They did it. They took New Mexico State's offense. They took Jerry Kill, their head coach, and Tim Beck, their offensive coordinator, and their best players. Stowers, the tight end, being one of them, their quarterback. And they're just going to implement that offense that beat Auburn bad a year ago at Auburn.
Yeah.
And guess what might happen here? Well, it's already happened. Diego Pavia's won the damn Iron Bowl. He beat Auburn and he beat Alabama. Beat Auburn and New Mexico State and beat Bama at Vanderbilt. He's got a chance to go to Auburn and win for a second straight year.
Oh.
Vandy is at Auburn later this year.
And now they have to avoid the national attention this week.
Who does this really suck for and hurt? The MTSUs of the world, the New Mexico States of the world, even Liberty to an extent. Those programs that aren't in the Power 4 at this point, because even Vandy can go and raid New Mexico State's roster, right?
Yeah, as long as you hire the coach.
And I say even Vandy because Vandy's still a distant last in the SEC in terms of football prestige.
Yes.
They can go raid New Mexico State's roster, who was the best team in their conference, and they can get their conference player of the year at quarterback to come in and play for them. So it's just going to be exceedingly tough for those level of schools to compete and hang on with their guys. But I think the depth piece of this and what Matt Rule is talking about is spot on. That Bama, that Florida in the Urban Meyer era, I mean, go through the dynasties, Ohio State, when Urban Meyer was there too, they were able to stack talent to the level where it was kind of a running joke. Oh, the starting corner at Alabama tore his ACL. Well, just put the next 6'2" freshman 5-star All-American out there who's going to be a top 15 pick in the NFL draft because they've got them falling out of trees at Alabama right now with the amount of talent they can get.
And, what it's also doing, it's allowing an extra school or two, a team or two, to get a 5-star.
Yeah.
Like a Missouri can land a 5-star that would have gone to be a backup at Georgia or Bama, right? They're still dominating recruiting, but it's not as dominant. And did you see where they're doing away with the national letter of intent?
Oh, yeah.
On 3, I saw that report. And then they've reduced the transfer portal. But I think another element of this, Chad, is the transfer portal timeline. That the first phase of it being open is in December, in the middle of the college football playoff. So, like, how every other school that's not competing there, even if you're in a bowl game, you can absolutely go to town on some of these other players across the country, and you don't know the situation if you're in the playoff about whether or not a player is going to possibly take an opportunity to see what type of money he can get elsewhere.
I'll also say, and
you can't replace them immediately.
I'm not saying that Nick Saban didn't work hard or his staff didn't work hard or any of that. They worked very hard. Georgia works very hard at all this stuff too. All the best programs, Ohio State, Texas, they're working hard. What NIL and all of this does, it forces everybody to work their absolute ass off at all times.
There's no dead time.
And there's also no, as you mentioned, Hutton, there's no overlooking Vandy and not having a plan for Vandy. You better come ready, especially in the SEC, every week, or someone will get your ass. And you better prep and plan and not go into a game running 4 or 5 plays. Hello, Josh Heupel in Tennessee. You got to come ready each and every week. You can't just roll the ball out and say, our defense is dominant, defensive line's going to physically mangle them, so we can just do this standard stuff and win the game. I think those days are long over now, and we're going to see how smart staffs are and how hard they coach during the week from week to week to see different game plans. And I'm not saying any of these coaching staffs don't work hard at all times. I'm sure they do. But we're going to see an emphasis put more and more on that. It's no longer just, oh, boy, it's easy to be the head coach at LSU, right, or Alabama because it's LSU or Alabama. And us here at, little old Vandy.
Or be Vandy to lose.
Or Mississippi State. We got to work harder and outwork everyone else. There's still some little bits of truth to that. But overall, everybody's going to have to work exceptionally hard to stay on top of this. And culture is still going to matter. Culture, scheme, a plan, fitting an identity, all of that stuff is still going to matter. An example of that is Florida State. Their culture and their identity and their theme was Jordan Travis leading them. I don't know that it was Mike Norvell leading them. It was their locker room a year ago. And when that locker room left and they brought in the wrong guys, we're seeing the result.
And it's also, sometimes a loss can give you a bit of a boost in building culture.
Absolutely.
But Vanderbilt lost to Georgia State. You better believe there's some hard practices after that, and they end up beating Bama.
Yeah.
So what can this loss do for Alabama after hanging on and then winning after a comeback against Georgia? Again, there's a flip there that Florida State wasn't able to grasp. We'll see if Bama can.
Well, Jacoby Thomas at Tennessee, a safety who transferred from Middle Tennessee a year ago, I saw he was talking to the media today, and a quote came out, and he said, well, one thing that I learned about this team is they really don't like losing the way this team has come back in practice this week and the attitude they have in practice.
Malachi Moore for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I'm talking about Tennessee now. But
yeah.
That, though, is important, right?
Oh, it has to be.
Like, does Florida State hate losing? I don't know. Are they apathetic to it now? Like, how are you going to get back and respond? Nick Saban has said a lot. He said it on game day recently. Don't waste a failure. That you cannot waste a perfectly good failure. Like, you've got to take that and grow from it and get better and improve. It's the only option. If you're a coach and you're a player and a staff, that's got to be your only option in that room is we must get better from this and learn from it. It's the fans that can be miserable and lay around all week and be depressed and talk about the season being over, but that's never an option.
Yeah, what's the rebound?
If you're playing sports, that part of it is never an option if you're a player or coach. It can't be within your locker room.